I stared at the envelope my father-in-law had just placed in my hands, and the baby kicked hard as if she knew something was wrong. "Open it," Richard said, his voice carrying across the living room where 30 of his closest friends sat watching. This was supposed to be my baby shower, my celebration, but Richard Sterling had other plans. I looked at my husband David, standing next to his father with his hands in his pockets. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I knew whatever was in this envelope, he already knew about it. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Legal documents. Pages of them. The words blurred at first, then came into sharp focus. Voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. What is this? My voice came out steady, which surprised me because everything inside was collapsing. Richard smiled, the kind of smile that probably served him well during his 40 years as a judge. "Maya, let's be reasonable. David and I have been discussing what's best for the baby, and we think it would be better if she was raised as a Sterling, full-time, without the confusion of 2 households, 2 cultures, 2 very different expectations." The room had gone completely silent. 30 people I'd never met, all watching me like this was dinner theater. "You want me to give up my baby?" I said it flatly, trying to process what was happening. "We want you to do what's best for her," Richard corrected. "You're a busy woman, Maya. Your career is demanding. David has told us how many hours you work, how stressed you are. And frankly, raising a child requires a certain stability, cultural consistency. The Sterling family can provide that." I looked at David again. "Say something." He shifted his weight. "Dad has some valid points, Maya. We should at least consider." "Consider what? Giving away our daughter?" "Not giving away," Richard interjected smoothly. "David would have full custody. You'd have visitation rights, of course. Supervised, initially, until we're sure the baby is adjusting well to her primary home. 7 months pregnant, standing in a room full of strangers, holding papers that would erase me from my own child's life. This was the moment I really understood that the man I'd married had never seen me as an equal. I was a mistake he was trying to fix. I found my father in the crowd. Thomas Chen, who'd said exactly 7 words since we arrived. "Congratulations. The house looks nice." He was sitting in the corner, ignored by everyone, nursing a glass of water. When our eyes met, he didn't look surprised. He looked prepared. He stood up. "We're leaving," I said quietly. "Maya, don't be dramatic," Richard said. "Sit down. We're just having a conversation." "No." I set the papers on the coffee table. "We're done here." David finally found his voice. "You're overreacting. We're just talking about options. The option where I'm not my daughter's mother? No, David. We're not talking about that." I walked toward my father, and he met me halfway, putting his hand on my back. Nobody tried to stop us. What could they do? Physically restrain a 7 months pregnant woman in front of witnesses? We got to his car, my car was still at their house, and he started driving, not toward my apartment, toward his office. "You knew," I said. "It wasn't a question," I suspected. "The way Richard looks at you. The comments about your job, your background. How David started asking me questions 3 months ago about custody laws in Massachusetts. I called my lawyer friend Karen 2 weeks ago. Just in case my husband tried to steal my baby." Dad's jaw tightened. "Yes." We pulled into the parking lot of his insurance agency. It was Sunday, closed, but he had keys to everything. We went upstairs to the conference room, and he pulled out a file folder, a thick one. "I've been documenting," he said. "Every comment Richard made about you being too career-focused. Every time David suggested you should quit your job. The text messages where Richard called you that Chinese girl, even though I've told him 100 times we're Vietnamese. Karen says it establishes a pattern of discrimination and hostility." I sank into a chair. "You've been building a case. I've been protecting my daughter." He opened his laptop and pulled up a document. "Karen drafted this 2 days ago. It's a protection order request. If we file it first thing tomorrow morning, we can get an emergency hearing by Tuesday. Richard's connections won't help him if we document his plan to coerce you into giving up your parental rights. He's a retired judge, Dad. He knows everyone in family court. Karen knows them too. And she's not retired. She's very active. Also, she's married to the current Chief Justice of the Massachusetts family court system. They met at our business networking group 5 years ago." I stared at my father, quiet, careful Thomas Chen, who ran a small insurance agency and rarely spoke at family gatherings. "You've been planning this. I've been ready for this. There's a difference." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Karen? It's Tom. It's happening. We need to file tomorrow morning. Yes, everything we discussed. She's with me now. She's safe. Thank you. He hung up and looked at me. Here's what's going to happen. You're staying at my house tonight. Tomorrow morning, we file for a protection order citing harassment and coercion. We'll include the documents Richard gave you, plus everything I've documented. Karen will request an emergency custody hearing. David will fight it. Let him. He handed you evidence at a party with 30 witnesses. Karen's already contacted 3 of Richard's neighbors who were there. She goes to church with one of them. They're willing to testify about what they saw. What about my apartment? My things? I'll send your Uncle Mike and your cousins to get everything tomorrow while David's at work. They won't take no for an answer. And Mike's 6'4". David won't start anything. I put my hand on my belly. The baby was moving, restless. This is insane. This is necessary. Dad's voice was firm. Richard tried to take my granddaughter. He gave you legal documents at a party to humiliate you into submission. He thought you'd be too shocked, too isolated, too scared to fight back. He didn't count on me. Why didn't you tell me you suspected? Would you have believed me? You loved David. You wanted the marriage to work. I had to wait until they showed their hand. He was right. 2 months ago, if my dad had said, "I think your husband is planning to take your baby," I would have thought he was being paranoid, overprotective. Now, holding those papers, I knew he'd been right all along. Monday morning, we filed. Karen was exactly as formidable as my dad had promised. 50-something, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She'd brought copies of everything. The documents Richard gave me, statements from the 3 witnesses, a timeline of Richard's discriminatory comments, text messages between David and his father that Karen had subpoenaed through an emergency motion. How did you get those texts? I asked. David's phone is on the family plan with Richard. Richard's the account holder. I got a warrant for Richard's phone records, which includes any phones on his plan. Legal. If you know who to ask, and you move fast. The texts were devastating. David. She's talking about going back to work after 3 months. Can you believe that? Richard. We need to handle this before the baby comes. Once she's born, it gets more complicated. David. Mom thinks we should wait until after the shower. Make it public so Maya can't just refuse. Richard. Good idea. Public pressure. She'll understand it's for the best. There were dozens more. Planning. Strategizing. Treating my pregnancy like a hostile takeover they needed to manage. The emergency hearing was Tuesday afternoon. Richard showed up in a suit, confident, with his own lawyer, someone he'd worked with for 30 years. David looked sick, pale, like he hadn't slept. Karen stood up and methodically destroyed them. She presented the documents Richard had given me. She called the 3 witnesses from the party, who testified about what they'd seen. She submitted the text messages. She brought in a psychologist who explained how coercive tactics create emotional trauma in pregnant women. Then she called my dad. Thomas Chen, in a suit I'd only seen him wear to weddings, took the stand and calmly recounted every incident, every comment, every slight. He had dates, times, locations. He'd been keeping a journal. Richard's lawyer tried to dismiss it. Mr. Chen, isn't it true that you might be overly sensitive about cultural matters? Perhaps misinterpreting friendly advice as discrimination? My dad looked at him. Is suggesting that my daughter give up her baby because she's too Chinese-friendly advice? That's not what, because that's what Richard said to me at Thanksgiving. He said my grandson, he assumed it was a boy, would be better off with less Chinese influence. I asked him to clarify what he meant by that. He said American children need American values. I was born in California. I'm as American as he is. The courtroom was silent. Judge Patricia Morrison, a black woman in her 60s who, Karen whispered to me, had worked her way through law school as a single mother, looked at Richard over her glasses. Mr. Sterling, you're a retired member of the Massachusetts judiciary. Yes, Your Honor. Did you, at any point, consider that your actions might constitute coercion, harassment, potential civil rights violations? Richard's confidence cracked. I was acting in the best interests of my granddaughter by attempting to coerce her mother into relinquishing parental rights. Judge Morrison flipped through the documents. I'm looking at text messages where you and your son planned this ambush. You chose a public setting specifically to pressure Miss Chen. You used your legal background to draft documents designed to intimidate someone with no legal training. And you did all of this while she was 7 months pregnant and vulnerable. She set down the papers. I'm granting the protection order. Richard Sterling and David Sterling are prohibited from contacting Maya Chen except through her attorney. I'm scheduling a full custody hearing for 2 weeks from today, but I'm issuing a preliminary order. Maya Chen has full temporary custody. David Sterling will have no access until the hearing. Richard stood up. Your Honor, that's... Sit down, Mr. Sterling. I'm not finished. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the room. I'm also referring this case to the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers. Your conduct, while retired, reflects poorly on the legal profession and may constitute ethics violations. David looked like he might throw up. We left the courthouse, and I felt the baby kick again. Strong, fighting. My daughter. The next 2 weeks were chaos. My Uncle Mike and cousins got everything from the apartment in one trip. David wasn't there, staying with his parents. Karen filed for divorce on my behalf. David's lawyer tried to negotiate, but Karen shut it down. Full custody to me, supervised visitation only, and David would pay child support. The thing about family court is that judges don't like liars. And David had lied in texts, in conversations, in his wedding vows. Judge Morrison had read everything. The custody hearing lasted 4 hours. Richard tried to paint me as unstable, career-obsessed, unable to care for a child. Karen brought my supervisor from work, who testified about my performance, my maternity leave plans, my professionalism. She brought my doctor, who confirmed I was healthy and prepared for motherhood. She brought 3 of my friends, who talked about the nursery I'd set up, the parenting classes I'd taken, how excited I was. Then Karen brought out the nuclear option, Richard's own daughter, David's younger sister Lauren. Lauren Sterling was 32, a social worker, and she was furious. My father has always been controlling, she testified. When I told him I was marrying someone who wasn't white, he didn't speak to me for 2 years. When my brother married Maya, Dad made constant comments about how she needed to fit in better with our family. I told David to stand up to him. David never did. Why are you testifying against your father and brother? The judge asked. Because what they did is unconscionable. Maya is having a baby, my niece, and instead of supporting her, they tried to take that baby away. If I don't speak up now, I'm complicit. Judge Morrison ruled swiftly. Full custody to me. David could have supervised visitation after the baby was born, 2 hours per week, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. He had to complete a parenting course and therapy before unsupervised visits would be considered. Richard was ordered to have no contact with me or the baby. David tried to approach me in the hallway after. Maya, please, can we talk? I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I'd married, who I'd thought would be my partner, the father of my child. He looked defeated, lost. No, I said simply. We're done. You chose your father over your daughter before she was even born. That tells me everything I need to know. I made a mistake. You made a choice. There's a difference. I walked away with my dad's hand on my shoulder and didn't look back. 6 weeks later, my daughter was born. Lily Chen, I didn't give her David's last name. My dad was there, in the delivery room, holding my hand. Karen was there. My Uncle Mike and my cousins were there, filling the waiting room with flowers and terrible coffee. David wasn't there. He'd sent a text through Karen asking if he could visit. I said no. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Lily had my eyes and my dad's chin and the strongest grip I'd ever felt. When she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, I knew every fight, every hearing, every sleepless night had been worth it. 3 months after Lily was born, David showed up to his first supervised visit. He brought a teddy bear and looked terrified. The court monitor sat 6 feet away, documenting everything. He held Lily for 20 minutes. She cried. He looked like he might cry too. She's beautiful, he said quietly. She is. I'm sorry, Maya. For everything. I didn't respond. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't undo the trauma, the betrayal, the fear he'd put me through. Sorry didn't change the fact that when it mattered most, he'd chosen his father's approval over his own child. He came to 3 more visits, then stopped showing up. His lawyer filed papers terminating his parental rights 6 months later. Richard had apparently disowned him for embarrassing the family. David moved to California. I heard through Lauren that he was in therapy, trying to rebuild his life. I didn't care anymore. When Lily was 8 months old, I met someone at her pediatrician's office, Jake Reyes, a kindergarten teacher bringing his nephew for a checkup. He was Filipino-American, funny, gentle with Lily, and when I mentioned I was a single mom, he didn't flinch. My mom raised 3 kids on her own, he said. Single moms are superheroes. Our first date was a play date at the park. Lily loved him immediately, grabbing his finger and laughing when he made silly faces. Our second date was dinner after I'd put Lily down, my dad babysitting, ready to call if anything went wrong. Our third date was a conversation about what we both wanted from life, from relationships, from family. Jake was honest. He wanted kids someday, but he understood that dating a single mom meant her child came first. Always. I respect that, he said. Lily's your priority. That's how it should be. A year later, Jake moved in. Slowly, carefully, making sure Lily was comfortable, that my dad approved, that we were building something real. On Lily's second birthday, my dad hosted a party at his house. Lily toddled around in a princess dress, chocolate cake on her face, surrounded by people who loved her. My dad, Uncle Mike, my cousins, Karen and her husband, Lauren and her family, Jake's parents and siblings. No David, no Richard. They'd sent cards, Karen forwarded them to me. I threw them away without opening them. Happy birthday, sweetheart, I whispered to Lily as she fell asleep that night, exhausted from playing. She yawned and grabbed my finger. Mama, one word. The only word that mattered. I thought about that moment in Richard's living room, holding those papers, feeling my whole world collapse. I thought about my dad's quiet preparation, Karen's fierce advocacy, Judge Morrison's justice. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. But I didn't lose. I fought, and I won. Lily would grow up knowing her mother never gave up on her, that her grandfather built a fortress to protect her. That family isn't about blood or last names or keeping up appearances. It's about showing up, fighting back, and choosing love over control. 2 years after that baby shower, I got a message from David through Karen. He was remarried, living in San Diego, working through his issues in therapy. He wanted to know if, someday, he might be able to meet Lily as her biological father. No custody claims, just to know her. I told Karen I'd think about it. Jake and I were engaged by then, planning a small wedding in my dad's backyard. Lily would be the flower girl. My dad would walk me down the aisle. Karen would be there, probably critiquing the wedding contract for fun. I looked at Jake across the breakfast table, feeding Lily scrambled eggs while she babbled about her toy trucks. What do you think? I asked him. About David wanting to meet her someday? Jake considered it carefully. I think that's your decision. I'm not her biological father, and I'm not trying to be. But I am her dad in every way that counts. And whatever you decide, we'll handle it together. What would you do? I'd wait until Lily's old enough to understand, old enough to choose. And I'd make sure she knows the whole truth that her biological father made terrible choices, but he's trying to do better. That's more complicated than a simple yes or no. I nodded. That felt right. Honest. Fair. That night, I replied to David's message through Karen. When Lily is old enough to understand her story, we'll let her decide if she wants to meet you. Until then, the answer is no. His response came 2 days later. I understand. Thank you for considering it. Please tell Lily I love her, even though I have no right to. I saved the message. Someday, maybe when Lily was 16 or 21 or 30, I'd show it to her. Let her make her own choice about whether her biological father deserved a place in her life. But that was future Lily's decision. Present Lily was chasing our cat around the living room, shrieking with laughter, while Jake pretended to be a monster and my dad cheered her on from the couch. This was my family, built from the ashes of betrayal, stronger than blood, unbreakable. I picked up my phone and texted Lauren, who'd become one of my closest friends. Thank you for speaking up, for choosing what was right over what was easy. She replied immediately, thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Lily's lucky to have you. I looked around my living room, the toy trucks scattered across the floor, the photos on the wall, Jake teaching Lily how to build a block tower, while my dad supervised with running commentary. Richard had tried to take this from me. He'd tried to erase me, to reduce me to supervised visits and cultural confusion. He'd failed, and my daughter would grow up knowing that her mother fought for her, that her grandfather protected her, that her family chose love over control, truth over tradition, justice over convenience. Lily knocked over the block tower and squealed with delight. Jake rebuilt it, laughing. My dad took a photo. This was victory. Not in a courtroom, though that mattered. Not in revenge, though justice was sweet. This Lily's laughter, my dad's smile, Jake's presence, the family we'd built from intention rather than obligation, this was the real win. Richard had wanted to teach me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, I'd taught him one. You don't mess with a mother protecting her child, and you definitely don't mess with Thomas Chen's daughter.